So people ask me all the time, what's the fastest way for you to be able to estimate and understand construction costs? And I'd say to you, plan it. You plan it, you don't go talk to a contractor until you know exactly what you're trying to do. The more that you know what you're trying to execute, the better the information from a contractor. But what does that really mean? That means you have to take a risk. You have to design. You have to make the assumption that you are going to have some risk in sunken costs. Sunken meaning you never move forward. And the only way to be accurate today is to get a design process and have that down in order to have documentation that somebody can actually build, because construction is impacted not just on labor and materials, it's also impacted on litigation, differing site conditions, the design process, the marketing, the availability of capital. And that is why when you ask someone, they may be wrong by 100% and you can't take their word for it. You've got to put that work in to get the accurate construction costs. So why are construction costs so hard to determine? How am I supposed to know? Well, it makes sense. I'm a general contractor. I build buildings. I should know all of it. But the reality is we don't. And on today's episode, I want to explain to you why we don't know all those costs, so that maybe in the future we can be more prepared and be closer to what that value is. It is a complex business where disparate problems can change what those costs are. So let's get into some of the easy categories to understand, to say, hey, are these the hard costs? Most people's perception of what construction costs are two things: labor and materials. If it was only labor and materials, you'd think that we'd be really close to knowing what those costs are. What is the estimate of manpower or people power required to execute, and what are the materials required for them to do so? But that would be simple, and that would be easy, and that is not construction. Labor, materials, simple, easy, but we don't know necessarily how much labor something is going to take. We can just take our past experience and try to make that application to the future, but again, we don't know. Let's talk about major cities. Who's taking the risk on it? Is it the contractor? Well, then he has to write in what his costs will be to take on that risk. Is it the owner? Maybe you get a better price. New York is a litigious place, so you just have to bake in costs of legal. That's another cost you don't even think about. Every state has a different insurance requirement that you need to know. In addition to insurance, in addition to legal, in addition to labor and materials, let's just talk about something that people never understand: differing site conditions. What don't you know about new construction? No matter how many models, how many things we explore, we don't know what's below the ground. So how can you know what the price of something can be when you have no idea you're going to transfer the load of this superstructure into the ground? You don't know. How about the construction process and the design process? We go and we get market information. We know zoning. We know the building code. We know what we're trying to build for. We're asking brokers. We're asking the marketplace. And then an architect has to put pen to paper. So imagine what we just said. Everything we just talked about cost. You're asking me costs on the street. You're asking me, and I don't even have a design yet for what you're trying to create. What materials are you bringing in? Is it high end? Is it low end? Is it going to be something that is a significant architectural significance that we don't even have the research and development to understand? Think of the Union Square, what the cost of that massive, gorgeous glass enclosure is on the top of the Union Square. I think it's on Union Square East. You don't know what those costs are. There's no way to determine it. So now you understand, when you go up to someone and you ask them what those costs can be, why whatever they're telling you isn't true. You've got to create contingencies. You've got to try to create zone defense to understand whether that cost is. And the only way to get closer and closer and closer is to continue to plan and price and plan and price. It is a broken process, but I believe that the future will change that process.